Hello, and welcome to Literacy Matters. I'm your host, Cheryl Lundy Swift. Today, I am super excited to talk with a dynamic duo, Tim Cusack and Vince Bustamante, who have authored a really awesome book entitled Leader Ready: 4 Pathways to Prepare Aspiring School Leaders. Hey guys, why don't you hold those books up so people can see them? Awesome. Great. Well, Tim has served as an educator for over 30 years, where he's worked as a principal and a superintendent in Edmonton schools, supporting over 100 schools. He's now working in higher education as the Dean of Education at Concordia University. While Vince formerly worked with Tim as a curriculum and assessment district leader prior to becoming an independent author and consultant who serves as a coach and content developer working with school leaders. Welcome to the show, Tim and Vince.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. We're very excited to be here today.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Great. It's so great to have you guys. So, as you know, I've served as a principal, and I'm now of that age where a lot of my principal friends and colleagues, and even some of my mentors, are leaving the profession, whether it's retirement or going into something altogether different. So we know that school attrition is an issue, right? So I would love for you to please tell me why you thought writing this book was so important.
Well, thanks, Cheryl. So in my role when I was serving as deputy superintendent, I had the leadership development portfolio, as I said, for 100 schools. So 100 principals, over 150 assistant principals. And to your point, we were noticing a lot of retirements, a lot of people retiring on time, where in the past, some people might stay longer. And so we had 75% of our assistant principals had fewer than 3 years of experience in the role. And so we felt we need to do something more deliberate and intentional to better prepare our aspiring leaders, hopefully to become principals. And as part of my doctoral studies, I asked assistant principals what they felt would be helpful to develop them. And they told us. And having worked closely with Vince over many years, and just a big fan of Vince's work in implementation and teacher preparation, it was a perfect partnership to help prepare our aspiring leaders.
Yeah, and I think for me too, the nice thing about writing a book with Tim is I've been able to witness firsthand kind of Tim's progression in leadership as well. So when I met Tim, he was the principal of the school I was teaching at. Then he moved on to an assistant principalship, then a assistant superintendentship, and then deputy superintendent. And I kind of followed in his footsteps, but it wasn't really my choice, in the sense that part of it was Tim recognized something in me that I didn't see in myself. And he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Vince, I really love what you're doing in the classroom. I think we could use some of these experiences at the district level. Do you want to be a leader?" And I flat out was kind of like, I don't know if I want to be a leader. It's it's not something I've considered. I didn't consider myself ready to be that leader. And it took a gentle nudge from Tim to encourage me to apply for a role that I fell in love with the moment I started. I didn't see that in myself. So I approached the writing of Leader Ready from that lens, that the aspiring leader lens. Like, I don't know where I'm going to end up as a leader yet, but I'm I'm on the pathway to that leadership role.
Wow. And I love that you said pathway, which is what you guys call it. You don't call it, we love to say pipeline in education, right? But you guys are anti-pipeline and more pathway. And I love that you mentioned that you were in the footsteps. Tell me why not a pipeline and instead a pathway?
Well, I can start, or do you want to?
Go ahead, Vince, for sure.
So we live in Alberta. Pipelines are big, right? We use pipelines for oil and pipelines for other commodities. And Tim and I both agree, and I'll let Tim kind of add his 2 cents after, that leadership isn't a commodity. And a commodity pipeline is, you put in water at one end and you're going to get water at the other end, or you put in oil on one end, that the other end of the pipeline is oil. And the development of our leaders shouldn't suffice to be one single track where you put some leader in and you get the same frame of a leader afterwards. Whereas the idea of a pathway is there's multiple different avenues to get to leadership. And when I think of if you were to ask myself back in when I was in university finishing my degree, what's the pathway to leadership in education? It's teacher, then assistant principal, then district office, and then you've climbed that ladder. But then when you get into it, there's so many other different ways to get to that one role that you want. So for me, the pathway is an idea that there are multiple different opportunities and journeys to get to leadership.
I love
Yeah,
that idea.
the pathway is more organic. And one of the things we want to understand are some of those traditional barriers, institutional barriers to the mindset that, you have to have X number of years before you can move to that next step. We recognize the importance of having depth and breadth of experience, but we also want to understand what gifts and talents do our teachers bring to our classrooms from outside of education that we can also put into work in terms of leadership. Maybe they've served in the military, maybe they're part of a community organization, maybe they're coaching. And often as systems leaders, we lose sight of that we have very talented people that bring leadership dispositions and attitudes, and that, the pipeline, yes, we need a supply of qualified and trained individuals, but the pathway suggests there's more organic and natural opportunities to build and to grow and to blossom and to aspire, and that you can wend around a vista, mountain pathway and not quite see where you're going to end up. Like Vince said earlier, he wasn't quite sure. But
Sure.
then you have that more knowledgeable other, that leader, that guide, that mentor that taps you on the shoulder, that you come with me and I'll point you in the right way. And
Yeah.
tell me how I can help you to grow. What do you need that I can best support you with?
Wow. I think that's honestly, that's the best kind of leader, is a leader who grows other leaders. So how do we create an environment to develop these aspiring leaders?
So that's one of our roots to leadership that we write about in Leader Ready. So we have 4 roots, and the creating an environment for implementation was, I would say, probably my largest contribution in the writing process. We already heard that a lot of this was focused on Tim's doctoral research, so we had a lot of that data already. But for me, in what I've realized with implementation in general is oftentimes we don't see through the implementation process. We stop for some reason. There's always reasons. We balance between greatest of intentions and never get to proper implementation. And part of the reason, I think, is because there's not structures in place, whether they're organizational structures, school structures, structures in general. And so for us, we wanted to recognize the environment as both a physical environment as well as a cultural environment. And so one of the main things that we talk about is the development of the skill, will, and thrill of leadership. So I've worked very closely. I've been very lucky to work very closely with Professor John Hattie and some of the work that him and I have done. And he talks about the skill, will, and thrill of the learner. We gently requested that we borrow that and put it to the skill, will, and thrill of leaders. So recognizing that leaders come with a capacity of skills, prior knowledges, experience that we can lean against, and then using their skills and developing the will and the thrill. So that their leadership dispositions would be the will. So do they know what to do when they don't know what to do? Because sometimes you're gifted with an opportunity where you may be acting leader, and then your principal's away and your assistant principal's away. So you're the most senior teacher, veteran teacher in the building. You're acting leader. Well, do I know what to do when I don't have anyone else to ask? And then lastly, the thrill, which are this idea of the motivations. So what are the motivating factors for our aspiring leaders? Is it just exclusively financial? And maybe prior to the pandemic, finances were really significant. More money for a greater role was more enticing than it is now. And we're seeing that in a lot of places where we're increasing salaries for principals and assistant principals, and yet no one is jumping into that pool yet, right? So the development of the skill, will, and thrill is one piece of the environment that we want to talk about. And then the next part would just be ensuring that there's a trusting environment that's established by the principal. This is a place where, Vince can come in and he can we're going to give him the ball, and if he fumbles the ball, it's fine. We're here in a trusting, supportive environment, and you learn by making those mistakes. Whereas traditionally in leadership development, it's almost stuffy, right? It's like I'm gifted an opportunity to be acting assistant principal for one day, I can't mess this up because they're never going to ask me again. So that's kind of the environment piece that we allude to.
I really love the idea of thinking about it from a physical and a cultural perspective, because you're right. We don't want to mess up, and we do need to provide the grace and the space to be able to do that. That's how we learn, right? That's fantastic. Tim, did you want to add anything to why we want to have and why we need to develop an environment to develop aspiring leaders?
Well, we know what an important role that principals play in the development of a school culture. I mean, we often hear the expression, so goes the principal, so goes the school.
Yes.
And, the principal as a trust broker, as a builder of hope, as an opportunity to kind of steady the ladder. And that's always been our perspective, is as a leader, we steady the ladder to let our team climb. Like if we're standing at the top saying, hey, everybody, you should see the view from up here, it doesn't quite work. So we need to build that together. And so when we talk about the environment for implementation, it's critical that the principal understands their role in bringing people along. Again, back to the pathway. Let me give you a tap on the shoulder. Let me hold your hand. Let me walk with you. Let me show you the things that are important to do. And Vince talked about some of that trepidation of, well, I'll try this, but what if I mess up? And again, that environment has to be supportive and trust-filled and open and honest and transparent. And that is the critical part of the principal, to understand their role in understanding the 5 senses of your building: the look, the feel, the sounds. What are you hearing? How are your teachers talking? What are you observing during PD? Are they engaged? Are they disengaged? What are you hearing from students and families? So that's a big part that the principal plays, and how our aspiring leaders see the principal working in that milieu is important if they're going to want to try to do it themselves.
Absolutely. So I totally agree. So now once you get that environment straight, the physical and the cultural environment, how do we actually prepare aspiring leaders for school leadership?
And that really is the crux of one of our pathways, which is preparing guided learning experiences. So we wanted to look at a model that basically understands, just like we want to meet our learners where they're at, we want to meet our aspiring leaders where they're at. And the best way is to ask them, to have the conversation. How do you feel about leadership? What do you wonder about leadership? Tell me why you're thinking that's not for you. Tell me why you absolutely can't wait to do that. And understanding those attitudes, and then having those conversations. So we talk a lot about that social persuasion, encouraging. So what do you think would be helpful then if you're not quite sure? What can we do? And so Vince and I talked a lot about building mastery experiences and moving along a pathway where we have like a level 1 experience where, let's say we're talking about looking at literacy strategies in the classroom, or looking at ways to engage teacher supervision, because that's a big part of school leadership. And so what can you listen to? What can you watch? Who can you talk to? What kind of surface level understanding can you have? And then we get into that sweet spot of complexity and rigor and challenge of trying a skill and learning from it. So if you're going to make a mistake, that's okay, because I'm, as the more knowledgeable other, I'm going to help you. I'm going to show you some preferred ways to do it. You're going to try and try again, and we're going to work together through that gradual release of responsibility, ultimately getting the aspiring leader to a mastery level of understanding. We want every aspiring leader to have a basis of what they should know, understand, and be able to do, just like we do for our students. And so we use a very straightforward model that designs the skills, designs the outcomes of what we could be doing or should be doing in a variety of leadership standards. And so it's a very practical model. And the best part of this, Cheryl, our assistant principals told us what they felt would be helpful based on their lived and current reality and experience. And I think from a systems perspective, systems leadership perspective, asking your people what's important goes a long way versus, let me tell you what I think you need. And so that really helped to build that trust. They felt listened to, valued, and appreciated. We had one aspiring leader say, we kind of got this level of training and our principals get this level, one of the first things we did was level that playing field. So everybody had an opportunity to get that baseline of experiential learning in the various leadership skills that are important to become a principal.
What I love about that model, Tim, is that the benefactors of that are our students, because
Yes.
you have a more skilled, more capable staff. And what's also awesome is that you, as a system, can then provide whatever gap, whatever professional learning that's needed for any gaps that are there. You can see trends because everyone has a baseline of knowledge. I love that. So now when you think about, developing leaders, right? How do your pathways lend themselves to developing leaders across an entire school system? I mean, you clearly have worked, you guys have worked in these larger school systems. So tell me how that works.
So I think part of it is the simplicity of the model, and also the modifications of the model, or the customizations of the model, to meet the needs of each aspiring leader. Now, the first pathway that we talk about that we didn't address much here is rooting everything in standards, right? Rooting everything in your leadership standards. Or if you're working in a school district that doesn't have leadership standards, we just curated a list of 4 general standards that you can follow along with here. But essentially, the district sets the district level leadership will set kind of the overarching goal based on standards. So, for example, if your district is currently undertaking a literacy initiative, right, as a district, and we're just going to kind of blow that out there. Well, part of the aspiring principal role is to become that instructional leader for that initiative. So we need to make that a focal point of those guided leadership experiences. So Tim addressed the level 1, level 2, level 3, which is essentially modeled right after the gradual release of responsibility. Level 1, you dip your toe in. Maybe I'm going to attend the literacy professional development session alongside of my staff as an aspiring leader, as a level 1. That's it. I'm just going to experience it. Level 2 might be with my principal's support. I'm going to lead part of the professional learning workshop for my staff at my district, at my school site. Still, Tim's there. He's the safety net for me. And then level 3 is, as the aspiring leader, I am now going to operationalize and run the professional learning workshop for my staff in my school. So it's a gradual release of responsibility that's all rooted and focused in whatever goal you're trying to achieve. And in the case of the initiative, it could be rooted in that. If you're not, I have not met a school district yet that doesn't have a bunch of initiatives they're currently undertaking. But if you are listening to this and you don't have initiatives that you're currently undertaking, we have root them in your standards, right? Because as an aspiring leader, I don't know what I don't know. So I can't develop what I don't know. So we root them in that common framework and language, which are those standards. And then from there, we determine where we need to grow as an aspiring leader, right? I know there are certain portfolios in certain schools where the assistant principal A is the disciplinarian, assistant principal B is the scheduler, assistant principal C is the one who is liaises with all the professional learning. And that may work, but my concern is what happens if assistant principal A now graduates to become a principal somewhere else, and we need to fill that position, and in-house we don't have any experience. So we need to share those experiences to make sure that everyone has that baseline foundational understanding of what's needed to become a principal.
Yeah, and Cheryl, that's really important. So you talk about across a school jurisdiction or a school division. That was part of the planning in our writing, is how do we look at more consistency across schools, let alone within a school. And so when we think of our standards, when we think of the environment for implementation, when we think of a model of graduated steps that builds the skills, competencies, and fluencies that every leader must espouse and understand and know and be able to do, then we move to that mastery level of they're able to do it. For not for 1 minute do we think that, once you've done that, you're ready and you're going to sit and you're going to be a great principal. A lot of the learning of being a principal happens once you're sitting in the chair and you are the principal, and there's a lot of on the job. But in
Yes.
preparing that better baseline of skill set across all schools, all levels, we feel more assistant principals, more aspiring leaders will want to become principals in a time when we really need them to want to become principals.
Yeah, I think you guys have done a really excellent job at making it easy. Just the language that you are using. If I were a teacher, I'd go, you know what, I know how to do that because I do that with my students. I think that's really clear, and especially at a time where we are really trying to make sure that our students are more proficient readers. It's really important to apply that very basic thing that you mentioned, Vince, to literacy. So I love that. It's been a pleasure talking to you all today. And thank you for what you're doing. And please, I can't wait to read your book. And I know our audience is going to get a lot out of the book as well. And we hope that it will lead to a lot of new leaders aspiring to become principals.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cheryl.